on this episode.
So, essentially, and this is going to be the most unscientific explanation of...
We had a civilization that was very well advanced.
Is it plausible that they existed?
If the pyramids were power plants,
We have no idea how they got it to where it is.
why was it put there?
Thousands of statues in Egypt. What's kind of special about these guys?
Do Egyptians stop using the pyramid?
Nothing comes close to the precision.
That, to me, was the best possible description of why these pyramids would exist. Been a little while. I think the past couple weeks you've been mixed in with a lot of guests. We're kind of back to where we started here a little bit, no?
Yeah, man. It's, I don't know. Kind of refreshing, in a sense.
I
It's
agree.
just kind of bullshit, like the way that we generally always do.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think we talked about going into this, we planned on doing 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 episodes and not probably having a single guest. It's going to be the two of us sitting here
Dude.
kind of kicking the shit around a little bit. And here we are. We had I guess 2 episodes. We did our intro episode and then MK Ultra.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, it's been guest after guest after guest. So
Oh, we had there was something else mixed in there. But to your point, we had Titanic mixed in there. But to your point, too, we had a shit ton of guests.
Titanic was Alan.
No, Alan was Shakespeare.
Oh, that's right.
Correct,
That's
Jack.
right. You're right. We did. You're right.
Yeah, man.
Okay. I'm
But
confusing
point being,
my conspiracies.
yeah. To your point, though, we've had a shit ton of people actually want to come on and talk to us, and I don't know why, but thank you.
I don't
to all
know
of them.
either. Yeah, I'll take it. Great shirt, by the way. Love that company, sfx.com. Big sponsor here.
Decent little company.
Of creating the videos, the team in the background. So tonight, I think what we're going to try to do is talk about one of the things that I know is on the top of your list. I think our dream guest for this would have been a guy named Jimmy Corsetti. For those that are familiar with him, he's been on Joe Rogan. He's all over Twitter. I think it's Bright Insight 6 on Twitter. We're going to talk about ancient architecture, some lost civilizations, and what we kind of think about them. At what point, I feel like you've always sort of been fascinated at this. At what point did you really get hooked? Like, what was it for you? Was it the pyramids?
No, actually, dude, you know what it was? It was Eric von Däniken and Charity of the Gods. So when I read that book, that for me, it's funny because now I would say that Egypt fascinates me more than any other subject as it pertains to just history and conspiracy and lost civilization and technology. In school, that bored the shit out of me. I remember doing that in like 6th grade. We went to the what city? Museum of Natural History. What city? Jesus, I meant what museum?
What
and
museum?
I
I
remember
got you.
going to their whole Egypt display, and I was bored out of my mind. I was like, oh my god, this is fucking boring. Now I love it. But to your point, I'm pretty sure it was when I read Chariot of the Gods, and when von Däniken touched on, it's a little bit of a tough read. No offense, Eric von Däniken, if you ever see this.
Oh, I think he'd be the first to admit that, honestly.
It's a bit of a tough read. Like I think it took me like 2 or 3 times to actually read the book, like to actually really not necessarily get through, but really kind of understand it. It kind of goes on a little bit. But there's parts in there where he really talks about ancient architecture and possibility of lost technology and things of that nature, and that's kind of really what got me hooked. What about you?
Yeah. It's hard to think about, honestly. I think for the longest time, before I even dive into that, I don't know what we're doing. We've become savages, and I guess all this time that we started, but it's cocktails and conspiracies, so cheers. I hope you have a cocktail. Yes, you do, with a little New York Giants. I always...
Not just Little New York Giants. This is Super Bowl champs.
Oh, okay.
Super Bowl
Let's hope
champs,
for a
New York
repeat
Giants.
this year. It's been a little while.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen,
I
but
think for
go ahead,
me,
continue.
I think for me, I mean, the concept of ancient civilizations has always been awesome to me, and it doesn't have to be lost civilizations. I love the like the medieval times
Hmm.
era. I thought that was really cool. The castles, the really cool architecture, and so again, Egypt is always a big one that kind of stands out because you've got the pyramid, you got the Great Sphinx. I never really thought anything of it. Um, in thinking about it, especially younger, I always kind of looked at it as like you got nothing to do. I mean, when were those pyramids actually constructed? I don't remember the date that they were supposed to have been constructed in, the
I
official
mean,
date.
in terms of like what mainstream archaeology tells you, around like
Mhm.
3,000 some odd years ago, I think, off the top of my head.
So, figure 3,000 years ago, people, according to what we're taught, are more or less living in sand huts that they're packing together. There ain't a whole lot going on. So to me, it really wasn't that out of the realm of possibility that you have, let's say a couple thousand people that are part of this civilization, and they are under the will of this pharaoh who's saying, "Hey, I want this giant pyramid here, and you've got nothing to do your entire day, so we're going to go and build this pyramid, and that's how you're going to spend literally every single day until until you literally drop dead." And so I think
Yeah.
I always dismissed the ideas that ancient Egypt was anything more beyond that because it's conceivable, right? Like if you have the raw materials right there, why can't you
Hmm.
just start building blocks and stacking them up to create a pyramid? Why can't you sit there and chip away at this Sphinx? Because even if you screw up, what else do you have to do? You're going to spend a whole day. Like we think about it now, like our lives revolve around hobby. We're sitting here doing this right now. Well, this might not have been the case, 3,000 years ago. It's dark out. We're probably sleeping, but we're waking up at the crack of dawn tomorrow. And if our job is to sit there and hammer stone, what are we to say? No, that's the only way we're going to eat. So I never
Yeah.
really thought much into it. It's just always sort of in the back of my mind. I mean, you've got all the crazy stuff out there too, right? Uh, any sort like the Stonehenge, for example, like any sort of large architecture,
Hmm.
megaliths, or I guess they're monoliths, megaliths.
I don't know
It's
what's
always
the
been
difference between
these.
those two words.
That's a good question. I think megaliths are probably off the planet. Megalith versus monolith. I'm just going to look it up.
Yeah, Google, man.
Difference between megalith and monolith is the large stone of the megalith complex or structure, whether it was meant to stand alone. So large stones standing alone are monoliths. Okay, mono. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, mono,
Right.
singular. Um, I've always looked at stuff like Stonehenge as again like the same type of concept. Why was it put there? Don't know. Don't really care,
Yeah.
honestly, for most of my life.
I mean, that one's much less compelling and not nearly. I mean, look, when you compare almost anything to Egypt, Stonehenge is kind of like, nah.
Right,
Still,
right.
though,
Hmm.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Hmm. What I think started to draw me in
Yeah.
was probably down in Mexico, or I guess really all of South America, even too, like the Mayan cultures, because it wasn't in one singular place. Like ancient Egypt's really the pyramids are kind of concentrated in one area. And the Mayan cultures, and I've got my dog squeaking on a toy, so I'm gonna have to throw her out of here in a second. The Mayan cultures, I loved the idea that it was this ancient civilization that just spread vastly all over the place, and it was this massive. And that goes back to like my idea of like I love the medieval times. I love the ideas of like ancient Rome and just like these huge kingdoms, and that's what the Mayan civilization was to me. And they were building these pyramids too. I didn't ever think
They're
supernatural of
so
it. Though,
different, though. You know what I mean?
they
Like,
are.
people point to pyramids, and it
Mhm.
is true. What you're saying is true, and I don't even want to necessarily harp on this, but people point to pyramids being built by ancient cultures from all over the world, and that's 100% true. And it's weird, right? And it kind of, and you and I have talked a lot about this too, is like a lost ancient global connection, which
Right.
seems like there's certainly a possibility, and that's a good piece of evidence pointing to the fact that that could be the case. But when you look, and I know that wasn't the point that you were making, but if you look at the pyramids of Giza, they just stand out and they're so different. And I know some other pyramids are technically larger when you look at them. I think Graham Hancock covered one of them. It might have been like episode one of oh my god, what's the show on Netflix? Uh,
I don't know. They're all
why am I
called kind
blanking
of the
on that
same
right
thing. I
now?
think it's like ancient. It's not ancient
Apocalypse,
architecture, is
Ancient
it?
Apocalypse,
Ancient
Ancient
Apocalypse. Yep.
Apocalypse. Yeah, yeah,
Great
yeah. I
series.
believe he covered that on like episode one.
Hmm.
One of them was actually might have been somewhere in South America. It could be Mexico. That's actually larger. But there nothing comes close to the precision and the intricacy of the Great Pyramids of Giza, right? With the different chambers, and I'm sure we'll get into what that could potentially be at some point tonight. But they're just different. They don't even look remotely close,
Right.
which to me is weird.
Well, what's probably the most weird to me about ancient Egypt is location of the pyramids. A lot of the times when you see the other pyramids, they're sort of within the realm of where life would probably have congregated. So, in the Mayan
Right.
culture, we're usually
Well,
in the
not
middle
only
of a
that,
forest
the
somewhere.
the Nile River actually ran much closer to where the pyramids were constructed back then than it does today.
Well, we're right. Again, extracting that from like your mindset, right? That's what sort of drove me to it. It's like, all right, well, you've kind of got the middle of the desert. You've got all these pyramids set up there. Probably not a whole lot of life in comparison to like being in the middle of the jungle where people probably lived around
Right.
there and there's a lot more tooling around there. Even though the Nile River was there, or at least was there at some point, to me that's not the first thing I had known at the time. And so I think that's why the mystique kind of exists around it. Plus the whole Egyptian
Yeah.
government's always been kind of tight-lipped on it. Like you can't really do much. You can go in there, they won't let you take pictures, no flash photography. They will arrest you actually. I've heard that on Jimmy Church's show before. Um, it's fascinating. So you talked a little bit about the purpose of the pyramids. We might as well just stay in ancient Egypt there. I think
Yeah.
for
Why not?
me, the stimulating thought came from an episode of Ancient Aliens, of course, because why wouldn't it? When they talked about them being ancient power plants, and I guess that's from Von Daniken's book. No,
I don't remember if it's in Von Daniken. I know that Christopher Dunn, who's a gentleman from England that lives in the U.S., he was just recently on Rogan, has a few books on the subject as well. And it was definitely explored. It was probably in Von Daniken at some point, but it was definitely
okay.
explored in Ancient Aliens. I remember that.
So that was really what kind of fascinated me the most. I'm going to try to look up the specifics of it. Um, Effectively the whole premise was that these giant pyramids were power plants and they were emanating wireless electricity out to the rest of the
Like Tesla.
civilization. Right, Tesla, exactly. And it's funny because I think they said that Tesla had studied the pyramids to a degree, and that's not obviously what he ended up making, but that to
Right.
me was the big trigger. We're like, all right, well, now we have a reason as to why this might actually be true. And I guess that all kind of comes down to the way some of the shafts were built. Now you can,
Hmm.
and I think in mainstream
The shafts and the
archaeology they do,
chambers.
right?
Yep.
Like they kind of dismiss them as like air pockets, just so like the compression of the air and stuff would move out of there. But what's fascinating is what you alluded to before is that the Nile River used to run really close to there, and if you kind of extrapolate out those 3,000 years to a little further, it's plausible that the Nile River was even closer and that maybe that area was a little more lush. It's not a barren desert wasteland this whole time. But what
Right.
they said is there's evidence of water residue within the lower chambers of the pyramid from research.
Hmm.
And so the concept there was that there could have been water running underneath in that lower chamber. What happens with water, for those not familiar, those don't live close to the ocean, I mean, it's second nature to us, but tides rise and they fall. And what happens is when you put that in a pocket, it creates pressure. And that pressure can create sort of a minor vibration against the rocks. And so that's what I guess this whole power plant theory came from is the shafts were funneling into sort of this central chamber, and it looked like there was residue, and this is where I'm gonna have to look it up, but there looked like there was residue of two different materials, call them liquids for the sake of discussion, that would hit this center chamber, and then the resonation of the water from the tides rising, creating that pulse in there. And it's not like they have to rise dramatically or over a quick period of time. It's just the earth shifts. We all know that, right? Everything's constantly moving. But because of the way it was structured, it would rise and it would kind of create this chemical reaction. And again, now all this chemical reaction is contained within this chamber. Now, if you think about how a battery operates, what is that? It's effectively just different liquids that are poured together and they're controlling power, right? Like it's
Right.
contained within this little device that you're plugging in and you're extrapolating the power out of that. Okay. Which is why they say, you cut it open, you're going to get battery acid all over yourself. It's going to burn you. Well, same basic concept here. It's a chemical reactions happening. And that would then emanate out through the way they built these pyramids, it's conducive to that electric and spit that out and create this wireless energy around. That
Yeah.
to me was the best possible description of why these pyramids would exist and why they would have weird shafts going to chambers that really weren't accessible um, by somebody on foot, and didn't really have like a tunneling into them. Like, it never really made sense to me that you're going to build this massive pyramid for a grave.
Well,
You know,
at that in its most basic form, right? Without even exploring the details of how it might have worked, is probably to me the biggest indicator that when I say that, I'm talking about the shafts and the chambers.
hmm
That's the biggest key indicator that it wasn't built as just a tomb or something like that, right? There's no reason to do that, right? When we look at other pyramids around the world or other pyramids in Egypt, they don't have those shafts. They don't have those chambers. Yet the Great
right,
Pyramid in Giza does have that. It's the only one, to the best of my knowledge, that does that. And in all of what we know from the dynastic Egyptians, nowhere does it tell us that it was used as a tomb, right?
right.
Nowhere does it tell us that anybody was or ever intended to be buried or entombed inside the Great Pyramid. So why do we think that that's the case, right? Like, to me, we just kind of look at it and go, oh, they built these giant structures, and a lot of times they honored pharaohs and, high priests and important people in society, so they must have built it as a tomb for somebody. But that's just us pontificating. But I mean, us,
hmm
I'm talking about, you know, the smart people.
People that are much
You know,
significantly more well researched on this than we are.
the smart people, right? They're stabbing in the dark. It doesn't make any sense.
Right, right. So I did a little quick research here as you were talking, just to kind of, I guess, endorse some of what I was saying, and some of those electromagnetic property theories exist. So I'm just going to kind of read a couple of these, just paraphrasing some of it. It's constructed from different pieces of limestone and granite. Again, granite's a little radioactive. It's got a little uranium in there, can generate weak electrical fields. But again, these are very conducive stones to electric. Um,
Hmm.
there's what's something called, it's the piezoelectric effect, which is the ability of something like quartz and granite to generate a charge in response to mechanical stress. So conceivably, the pyramid stress of all of these blocks being on top of each other could discharge some sort of energy, and again, that's being harnessed within the walls there. What I was mentioning before is the aquifer underneath, right? And so that's that
Right.
subterranean water, and it is built above a natural aquifer. I'm reading here, so the movement of that water is what was probably generating those electrical currents, whether it be the tides or the actual flow of the water. We talk about all the time right now. What are we trying to harness? Alternate forms of electricity, and what is one of those? Hydroelectric power, right? So
Right.
what's to say
Exactly.
that that didn't happen then as well? And then, of course, the shafts, the way those were set up inside. I'm not seeing anything specific on the materials that poured down. I can never remember the episode of Ancient Aliens that it was in, but it was very specific
Yeah, Christopher
material.
Dunn. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I believe it's
Uh-huh.
Christopher Dunn. If not, we'll fucking edit that in somewhere.
Take our
Um,
apologies. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, buddy. Very smart man. Much smarter and done a lot more research than we have. He talks about that a lot as well, about the potential, about the specific chemicals that one might have used that would be put into each one of those shafts to then
Right.
create a reaction and then yeah,
And that's
have it
what was
work.
most fascinating to me, is because there's residue of those chemicals on each of the shafts.
Right.
And so that's what caught
Yeah.
me, is what other reason would there have been for those chemicals to be there, or to be there?
Exactly.
And if you're dumping those in, and you, so like as you read through all these different options, I mean, they say that there used to be like maybe a gold piece on top of it. So then you're getting
Yeah.
maybe
So they
lightning
apparently had
conducting it.
caps.
Oh, they have caps,
Apparently,
right?
apparently it had a cap.
Right. So
Yep.
now start to combine all these elements, even in small bits and pieces, because you might think like, okay, well, how much water, how much electricity is water creating? Probably not a lot. How much reaction are these chemicals creating? Maybe not a lot. But now you combine all these things. You're built on top of an aquifer. It's pulsating. It's giving some energy, some base energy. You've got these chemicals going down. It's creating this reaction, a little extra energy. Then you've got this gold cap on top. It's made out of limestone and granite. The granite itself, from the stress of that, creating a little more energy. The cap on top, let's say it serves as, a beacon, a rod, a lightning rod to draw
And I'm
in.
not sure if it was gold, but if it was gold, we know that gold is an excellent conductor of electricity.
I'm reading specifically. It's only a theory, of course, but the theory
Right.
suggests the pyramid originally had a gold capstone to conduct electricity. So if you capture all these things together, I mean, Ben Franklin's famous story is hanging a key to a kite and conducting
Yeah.
electricity, creating electricity from that. So
Which might have
what is
been
to
bullshit,
say
but
that
still a
all
fun
these?
story.
Oh, exactly, but that's what you're taught, right? Again, you're taught it's a
Right.
very oversimplified way of it, but why is that not the case back 3,000 years ago? You don't think somebody walked around with a stick of gold, got hit by a lightning bolt, at some point, because they realized that might have been a little conducive. So what's to stop
Right.
that? The other pretty fascinating thing, again, this is going to apply to most pyramids that are out there, but can stay on the Giza side. There's no evidence of soot from torches, and that was the other thing that
Yes.
sort of was pretty interesting to me. I
So
don't
I
know.
was gonna bring that up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you what is, man, I sound like a really stupid person tonight. What's the famous cathedral in Rome? Um, you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Where Michelangelo and the paintings all over the ceiling and
That's not
whatever it's called.
I know what you're talking about. Not St.
So you know what I'm
Peter's.
talking about? No.
Yeah. Oh God. Sistine Chapel.
There you go, Sistine Chapel. So the Sistine Chapel actually had to be restored
Hmm.
because at one point, what did they use for light? They burnt candles,
Right.
right? It was open flame, and there was so much soot that it actually completely covered all of the paintings on the top of the
Oh,
Sistine
interesting.
Chapel,
Huh.
right? To the point where you couldn't even see them. So they had to actually restore them. They had to go up, they had to remove all the soot, they had to restore it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we know that's what happens when you burn
Huh.
open flame inside of a building. So to your point, why do we see zero evidence of that inside the pyramids?
Well, so that was going to be
To
like
me,
my
that's
realist perspective
fascinating.
is would that soot have like sat there unscathed for 3,000 years, and
Hmm.
could you find evidence of it? I mean, maybe. I guess the answer is yes. It would have created
Yeah.
like a coating on there.
Now,
I don't know enough
granted,
about that.
yeah. Now, granted, right? If you are, and I guess maybe this kind of contradicts itself, right? Because if it was built to be a power plant, and inside those chambers and these shafts there are chemicals, maybe that's why you don't see the soot because it's been, I don't know if eroded is the right term, right? But it's been
Well,
removed
that's.
by those chemicals. That
I mean,
could be.
the theory effectively is that though is that there might have been an alternate lighting source that wasn't burning torches, and if that's the
Right.
case, what would that lighting source have been? Because it's not like they had windows built into the side of this thing. I don't
No,
really
it's pitch
know.
black, dude.
Right.
You can't see anything. It's literally pitch black.
Right. And it's fascinating to me because at what point do Egyptians stop using the pyramid? Right? Like I know it was a part of the culture at one point. At what point does that stop being a part of the culture where like all this
I don't
stuff
think the
gets lost?
dynastic Egyptians ever used them.
You don't think so
Like
at
the
all?
dynastic Egyptians, as we know them, I don't think that they ever used them. I gotta be honest. I think it
So where does
was.
that transition stop? Right? Ancient Egyptians
I
were
think it
using the pyramids
stops.
as part of their culture. When does that end?
I think it ends around the time of the Younger Dryas, and a cataclysm that occurred about 12,000 some odd years ago.
Explain the Younger
I think
Dryas.
there's so essentially, and this is going to be the most unscientific explanation of the Younger Dryas that anybody has ever heard. But essentially, what that theory proposes is that somewhere around 11 to 12,000 years ago, give or take years, there was a cataclysm, most likely an airburst, that occurred and caused these cataclysmic events that wiped out large portions of not just civilization, but mammals on Earth around that period of time. And we know this because, again, very unscientific here, but
Hmm.
archaeologists can go into you can see layers of the Younger Dryas in the soil, right? So if
Right.
you're digging down, you could actually see the layer of exactly what it is, and we know that it is burnt material that occurred from an airburst that just devastated everything, right? And so what you got to understand too is it wasn't just this fire that we're talking about, right? That was the impact, or that was the cataclysm number one that then could have potentially caused the chain reaction for all of these, right? Tsunamis, earthquakes, like what else could have potentially happened because of
Right.
this tremendous airburst that was just so devastating to our planet that civilization and most mammals as we know it during that time, a lot of them were wiped out.
You hear that even now too. Like if we
Yeah.
were to get hit by a comet, or if you were to have like a major weather event, that earthquake is going to spur a tsunami, which is going to spur a hurricane or a tornado, or like it's a domino
Well,
effect.
it already does happen, right? I mean, where do
Right.
tsunamis come from? They generally come from earthquakes, right? So they
Exactly.
go hand in hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, a lot of I've watched a lot of disaster porn films. I love them. They're so much fun. I don't know how I'd ever survive something like that. Like you think of like oh, what's the one they ice over in New York City? The Day After Tomorrow. That
Oh,
one's
dude,
like
I
a
fucking
crazy
hate that
one.
movie so much.
Oh, I
Was that
love
Day
it.
After Tomorrow? Was that it? Dude, my
That
wife made me
yeah,
watch that movie. No. Wasn't there one called 2012?
that's 2012. That's a completely different one. Yeah, yeah. That was when
Is it the
all the
same thing?
cataclysms happened after. Well, they're different cataclysms. Day After Tomorrow is global warming. Basically, the whole country freezes.
Okay.
2012 is it's basically the Earth is shifting the crust around, and there's
Okay.
there's earthquakes, there's tsunamis, there's openings up in the rifts. The things are separating. They're flying planes over to China to get on arcs. It's effectively with Noah's Ark story. There's San Andreas, where the San Andreas fault explodes, and that throws off the whole thing. Yeah, there's so
You know
many.
me, dude. I'm not a big movie person, and my wife
Oh,
made me watch that one
love.
night. Or like she picked it out, and like I had no interest in it. And after we watched it, we were like, "Yeah, that movie's fucking terrible."
That was great. They're all so good. But not to get too steered off topic there. But yeah, I wanted to give a little context on the younger drives, because I know it's thrown around a lot, and we try to pride ourselves a little bit on being for
And
the everyman.
by the way, anybody that
So,
wants to really, truly, fully understand the Yoga Drives, do not take it from me and what I said. Go do your own research.
no,
And
I
you
think
can get
you definitely nailed it.
that's the very basic crux of it. It's much more intricate.
The
It's much sexier
overview
than
that
what I made
I
it sound.
now the overview I pulled from that is the Younger Dryas is a significant climatic event that occurred towards the end of the last ice age, around 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. So you nailed the timing. It's characterized by a sudden and temporary return to glacial conditions after a period of gradual warming. This event had profound effects on the climate, environment, and human societies at the time. And then it jumps into a big detail of it. So I mean, you pretty much nailed what it
Right.
is. There's no doubt about that. It just was that
Good,
it was
baby.
a cataclysmic event that a series of things happened that we can identify by layers in the soil. Which is kind of another piece that I want to kind of dive into here as we kind of transition away from ancient Egypt, because I don't want to suck up all the time at the pyramids. I know we can.
But I got
Um,
more about ancient Egypt I want to talk about, bro.
you got more in Egypt?
Fuck yeah, I got more. Dude, I could do a whole fucking 6 hour show on Egypt.
All right, then dive into Egypt. I thought we were going all over the place. If this is going
So,
to be an Egypt show,
I
make it an Egypt show.
maybe we should just make it an Egypt show. All right, so this is something that, and again, I'm going to shout out Jimmy Corsetti. Anybody that does not follow Bright Insight on X or YouTube, if you're into this kind of stuff, like he's the guy to follow. As well as I'm sure there's many other experts out there. This is something that I found by checking him out, and I was completely unaware of this. Have you ever heard of? It's called the Colossus of Memnon.
I have literally no idea what that is.
All right, dude, check this out. Ready? So I'm actually going to share my screen with you real quick, and I'm going to show it to you.
Okay.
So check this out. This is
Colossus
something that
of
again,
Memnon.
I have never. Let's go to the Google machine. Oh, let's go to my window. Let's go here. All right, you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right, you see this here? So this is the Colossi of Memnon. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly.
Yep.
So when you first kind of take a look at them, and you kind of look at them and you go, okay, there are statues in Egypt. Great. I've seen thousands of statues in Egypt. What's kind of special about these guys? Let me click on this, see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There you go. It's a little bit bigger.
Yep.
So what's important to understand, so first and foremost, look at this photo. Do you see the scale and the size of these?
Yeah. Massive.
Okay, so look at the people on the ground, and then look at the size of these statues. All right, so the one on the right clearly was damaged and was filled in by smaller rocks, but the one on the left, that's whole, that's intact. Still, you know, there's clearly some kind of erosion and just damage over the years, but that's intact. These are 60 feet tall, okay, roughly 60 feet tall, and weigh over 720 tons. But here's the kicker, dude. They were carved from one single block of granite. So if
Interesting.
you're telling me that the carved block weighs 720 tons, how much did the block weigh before it was carved from
Right.
one single block, right?
Huh.
And what's fascinating about that, if you don't find that fascinating already, and something that we didn't really touch on, how did they get these there from the quarry? How do you move something of that scale with what we know in terms of technology that the dynastic Egyptians had? And I'll tell you the answer. You ready for it? You don't. You don't.
So, so
Based
do
upon the
you think?
technology.
Do you think that those blocks existed there already, or do you think they were moved in that position?
Is it plausible that they existed? I suppose, right? So let's just take a look at this photo real quick, all right? That would mean that there would have to be, because we have two of them there. And now, I don't think that they even had the ability to move a 720-ton stone, let alone something much larger. But
Right.
that would that
It'd be
would
hard to do
mean that there
today.
would have to be a block that it was so big that you'd be able to carve both of these in the same location so that you wouldn't have to then go ahead and move either one of them. I just and then that we would find no evidence that there was something there that large. Now, granted, I know it's been obviously a very long period of time. If you ask me,
Right.
it's been way longer than 3,000 to 4,000 years. I think this is potentially as old as 40,000 years ago. I think there's some evidence to support that. Um, yeah, I guess it's plausible. I think it's unlikely though. And what I'd say is we kind of we know where the quarries were, right? So
Right.
you can do the research, and I couldn't tell you exactly where they were off the top of my head, but we know where these were quarried from, and it was hundreds of miles away. So now let's talk about, and we can go on and we can take a look at some other statues as well that are actually even more impressive than that. But let's talk about how they actually got them there, right? So if they transported these giant stones over the earth, I don't know of anything that they had at the time that would enable them to go ahead and do that. The other theory is, okay, well, they moved them down the river. Do you know there's only been one ship that has ever been found from ancient Egypt that's called Khufu's ship? Have you ever seen a photo of that?
No.
I'll show it to you.
Khufu, huh?
Khufu, correct. And I just typed Khufu chip.
I love it
So
when
I'll
you
show you a
screen
photo
share and
of
everything
Khufu's
gets
ship.
jammed up. There we go.
Why am I putting Fuku?
I don't know, man. Those fingers aren't working tonight.
Yeah, I know. I already worked today.
Now you got flu ships.
I got it. I got it, baby.
Khufus. There we go. Give me Google
So
Images.
this is the only boat
Oh,
that we found from ancient Egypt, from the
I mean, I
dynastic
think it's pretty
Egyptians.
plausible that was pulling like a 700-ton rock.
Yeah, absolutely. They definitely put it on that and they floated that down the Nile.
I,
It's
I
just
mean,
it's silly to think.
in
It's
in
silly to think that they did
fairness,
that.
in fairness, you can float heavier cargo down a river with a little bit of a nudge. Now, would that rock sink to the bottom? Probably. And how would you get it on and off the river? That's a bigger
I don't
question.
know
So
how
I
that's
get what you're
happening.
saying. I don't think it's happening either. But to play devil's advocate a little bit, it's not
And I get that.
completely
That what you're saying
implausible.
does make sense, right? But
Right.
when we're talking about, and I know you know this, but when we're talking about the scale
Right.
of
Right.
these rocks, that's not plausible. That's silly, right? I mean, this is the only ship that we've ever recovered from ancient Egypt. I mean, come on, that's silly.
Yeah,
It doesn't
it's
make
I
any
guess it's
sense.
I guess it's more fascinating to be the fact that they would have only had one ship and not been a little more versed. Of course, that's assuming that they built all of this architecture themselves and it wasn't built before them and they just found it and utilized it as well, which is
Right.
another topic. I guess
Correct. Exactly.
staying with the Colossus of Memnon, how do we know that it was carved out of one rock? Is that an obvious answer or
I guess when you take a look at, and again, not talking about the one on the right, you can clearly see that that's
yeah,
been
that it was
repaired.
replaced? Yeah.
And this isn't the best photo, and I'm sure when you're actually there in person,
I'm looking at a couple other
you know,
photos on the Google machine as well. If you want to flip back to your, I don't know if you still have that open there. But yeah, I'm
go back.
seeing some other vantage points of it, and that's certainly pretty
Okay, so
helpful.
let's take
Yeah,
a
so
peek.
click on a couple of these other guys
So let's
here.
look at this right here.
Some of these seem to have a better view on it. They're
It'd be
gonna
great if
they're gonna
that
put it in
photo
those small
actually
little
lived on this
packages.
page.
I think what you need to do is just go back to Google, right click on it on the image right there. Actually, even if you just press that little screen capture button in the lower left, that should open that sucker up
This here.
right there. Yep. That open it up?
It's not gonna be
Oh
able to
no,
do
it's
it.
just scanning it. And never mind.
No, yeah, it's
Just
getting
try
it.
to right click on it
Anyway,
and
I
then
mean, you
just
can even see it
open it
from
with.
here, though, dude.
Right. Yeah, it looks a little more crisper there. Interesting. There you go. That's what we're looking for. Yeah, that's. I guess you can kind of tell from there. And the
Yeah.
seam
Now,
doesn't really
granted, to
look like
me,
there's
and
seams.
right, we're not there, so
Right.
we're
Right.
using
Yeah, you never
evidence
really
off
know from a
of
picture for
just a
sure.
photo. We could be wildly wrong, who knows? But based upon what I see here, does it look like potentially the very bottom base could be something different?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
when I
Right.
say something different, mean being another stone. I guess it could. From what we're told from the experts, though, this is all carved out of one single stone,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I mean, that's absurd. That's just absolutely
Yeah.
absurd.
So what do you think then? I mean, do you really think that it was the ancient Egyptian culture with or without assistance or technology? Do you think that they kind of stumbled into it? Because we touched on that a little bit.
I think yeah, we've talked about this earlier. I think it's more plausible. I think there's one or two things, right? I think that it could have been not that they wouldn't be Egyptian, right? But it's an older Egyptian culture than what we're taught
Okay.
about in elementary school today. It wasn't the dynastic Egyptians that we know of. It could have been a more advanced Egyptian civilization that we're aware of. And then, boom, 12,000 years ago, you have the Younger Dryas. Most of them are wiped out. As Egypt and that area starts to repopulate, to your point, they kind of stumble upon these things. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And now, from what I understand, and I couldn't cite you specific evidence, but the Egyptians spoke about the older ones, right?
Right.
Talking about civilizations that went back literally 40,000 years. Again, I couldn't cite you specific evidence, right? But that is talked about in Egyptian culture. So
Right.
that's possibility number one. Possibility number two is okay, maybe it was built by the dynastic Egyptians as we know them to be, but there had to be some technology that they had, and we're not aware of it because based upon what the school books tell us, you couldn't have moved
Doesn't work.
these things.
Doesn't add up.
You,
Yeah.
you couldn't
Yeah.
have cut rock the way that they cut rock. It's not possible. I mean,
Right.
people have gone and tried to actually replicate using these bronze saws. I want to say they cut maybe 4 millimeters an hour. 4 millimeters. That's like, I don't know. Do the conversion on that. That's like nothing. Yeah, so how did you cut this rock? It just none of it adds up. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I think my favorite one, and maybe because I just find that to be a little bit more exciting, is that it was a different civilization, an older civilization that actually built these things. I think that's probably what I lean towards.
Yeah.
It just seems to make a little bit more sense to me. What do you think?
I tend to agree with that. I don't know that I want to always attribute everything to aliens. And maybe it is. Maybe it's just another civilization that left this planet. I don't know. Maybe they were here and they came and gone. Maybe they were originally from here. And when the Younger Dryas hit, it just sort of took everyone out of here. And that was the end of that. They
Yeah.
fled the planet, whoever was left over. Don't know. Um, but I do think we've discussed this in our very first episode is what would our civilization look like in 100 years, in 1,000 years, in 100,000 years, in 300,000 years? What would it look like? And it'd be a shell of
Right.
itself. It'd be missing, especially as technology continues to advance. And I think there's a lot of conspiracy about alternative power sources that are gobbled up by governments and kind of filed away in a filing cabinet somewhere, and that's just where it's left at that point. um I think it's totally plausible. I think that actually, for me, the most likely scenario is that there were ancient civilizations that were just as advanced as we are. Actually, probably significantly more advanced, but using ourselves, using our current 2024 era humanity, I think there's no doubt in my mind that there was a civilization that had this level of technology already acquired. And whatever happened, if it was the Younger Dryas effect, I don't know if that was man-made or just a freak accident or whatnot, but whatever the reason was that the civilization is gone, it wiped everything out. Because again, I'll pose the same question to you rhetorically this time as I did in the first episode: is all of your photos, where are they? They're living on a cloud server, which is on a computer, which can melt and disappear in an instant. Your house is made out of sticks and dust. It's all going to just dissolve into nothingness. And there are
Yeah, dude. I
structures
mean,
that we
that's gone
have.
in hundreds of years, let alone thousands.
It's gone in a decade, honestly, half the time. You get a big
Yeah.
cataclysmic event like that. Like you get, look at Hurricane Sandy and what that did to the Jersey Shore, right? It wiped out homes. There were sections of homes, like, or there was lots that had homes of 2, 3 story homes that were just empty. And so that's one storm, one time in our lifetimes, and we're under 40, right? But in 40
And it was
years,
only a superstorm, wasn't even a hurricane.
well, yeah. Well, that's a conspiracy. That's actually a great conspiracy one. Why they
It is.
downgraded
We should do
that.
an episode on that.
So that's why, and that's really what drew me into the pyramids being power plants. And I'll let you bring up this picture in a
Right.
second here. I
Yeah,
always
yeah.
like to look at things from a very realistic standpoint. That's my thing, right? Is I don't I love the idea of speculation. It's so much fun. That's what makes this stuff enjoyable. But I like to be real about it. And to me, the what's Occam's razor. We've referenced that in the past. Typically,
Hmm.
the simplest answer is the correct one. And to me, the simplest answer is we had a civilization that was very well advanced and they built all of these things. For what the reasons are, we can only speculate on, but they built them nonetheless. And they built their entire communities around them. And although they do show differences from one culture on one side of the planet to the other, we've already established in mainstream, I don't want to call it archaeology, but mainstream history, that Earth, all of our continents were once one continent called Gaia. And through tectonic plate shifts, they spread out and now the continents are all over the place and we still see those shifts happen today. We could end up where Russia and the United States or Alaska and I guess Canada really will be butting up against each other in maybe another
Well, dude,
couple
there's a
million
lost
years.
sunken continent. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's fascinating to me to think about. I think um that's the direction I'm going to go. Again, they could be the aliens, I don't know, and I don't want to necessarily speculate that
It would
point,
be
but I
fun.
think it'd be great. It'd be great to know that there was a civilization that was on Earth that was so technologically advanced that they realized this younger Dryas was about to hit and it was going to screw the hell up out of this Earth. And they knew and they figured out a way to get off this planet. It could be that they were already spacefaring and they've set up colonies all over the place. And maybe those are the people that are coming back and visiting us right now.
Who knows?
It'd be phenomenal. I don't know if that's true. I don't. Who knows? But I do. I think I could say with an air of confidence that there was some technologically advanced civilization that lived here, and I've attested that to the dinosaur era, like the Jurassic era, or whatever whatever other eras you want in that. But to dinosaurs is, I've always postured that to me it's plausible that we as humans existed then. Like it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that the only thing that existed in the time of dinosaurs were these massive creatures. Absolutely no way.
Yeah.
We're just not
That's
finding the
bizarre.
remains of these little itsy bitsy beings. And if you take the Younger Dryas effect or the Younger Dryas cataclysm, I guess, to what it is, and you believe that that happened, which there's scientific evidence of it, what did it do? It created layers
Hmm.
upon layers of sediment. Conceivably, what actually happened is our grounds got higher, right? So that's why sometimes you see some of this architecture completely buried. It's because over time, dirt accumulated on top of it from storms and just natural erosion. Things went down and other things went up, and water levels changed. And to me, the truth about what could have been there, number one, it could be underwater, but it could also be under
Hmm.
hundreds of layers of dirt. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, dude,
So
look
what
at
do you?
Göbekli Tepe, and I know we're still on Egypt, but I'm sure
Yeah.
we'll talk about
Well, I
that at
guess we're
some
staying
point.
on Egypt for the
And
most part tonight. So
yeah, that could have been Göbekli Tepe could have been intentionally buried. But to your point, right, there are whole cities that are underground. I mean that we haven't uncovered yet. Oh, so this last picture. So this is just another example of a monolithic structure. This is at the Ramesseum. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly either. So this
yeah,
statue, as you see, is destroyed. Was even larger than the Colossus of Memnon that we just talked about. So this is weighing over 1,000 tons. Okay.
it's
Not only
absurd.
that, what's interesting about this one, right? This statue was seated, okay? Similar to what we saw with the. I'll go back to it real quick if I could find it. Similar to what we see here at the Colosseum Memnon. See how they're
Hmm.
seated? But they
Yes.
were. It was actually seated lower than that, okay? weighed more, but it was seated lower than that. So what happened that it completely what cataclysmic event or whatever occurred that destroyed this statue weighing over 1,000 tons and just blew it to bits? How does that happen?
Right.
Could it be an earthquake? Sure, absolutely. But then tell me how the statue
Right.
to the left of it is still standing, right?
Right.
It's very bizarre to me. And maybe the statue to the left was built much later. I have no idea. Not an expert on ancient Egypt. I don't even know what you'd call that statue to the left. But again, just something else that I wanted to show you. Another example of an absolutely monolithic structure that we
Yeah.
don't know how. We know where it was quarried. And
Right.
we know that it was quarried hundreds of miles away. We have no idea how they got it to where it is, and then shaped it to what it looked like today. Because you couldn't shape something like that. You can't shape granite with bronze tools. It doesn't work, right? Bronze is softer than granite. Your bronze chisels will chip and bend.
Yeah,
It's
they'll
not
be
going to shape that.
demolished.
So how did they do it? Exactly. So
What about
good stuff.
obelisks? Have you ever thought about obelisks?
I haven't put a ton of thought into them. What do you think about obelisks?
Well, that's what I was going to kind of get at is, I mean, they're number one, they're really cool looking, and they always seem to be the heart of like any video game you play. There's always an obelisk
Yeah,
that's like set up that you have to kind of go to, and that's like the where you're getting your superpowers, you're advancing to the next level. It's like your major save point or a boss fight or something like that. I don't know that that's accidental, and it's something that we've actually sort of adopted into our own cultures, into modern day. You see obelisk type structures in the United States, for one example. I don't know. That's another one. Like if the pyramids were power plants, I
I was just
tend
going
to
to bring that
wonder
up. What if the obelisk was the source to pull that power in?
to extract it, right? Like we have
Right.
telephone poles that are
Exactly.
passing along, electrical wires and whatnot. What's to stop that from being the same piece, right? And if you think back to Nikola Tesla, what did he do when he was creating his Tesla coil? Are you familiar with the Tesla coils at all?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So for those unfamiliar, he basically takes this coil, he jams it into the ground. He says that you can harness electricity from the air effectively. But when he places another coil, let's say X number of yards away, those coils are passing the electric back and forth to harness it. And so I'm wondering if that might have been really what the purpose was of those obelisks, right? It could be
Could
a
have
lot
been.
of them are dedicated to different religious figures. There's the Temple of Karnak, of Luxor, and they've typically got writings all over them or inscriptions. So I think it's totally plausible that they were in some sort of a memorial of whatever god that they happen to be praising to at that particular time. I think it's
Hmm.
also plausible. There's some speculation about it being in alignment with stars and kind of maybe other sort of solar
So here's a thought. Here's a thought,
anomalies.
right?
Yeah.
You just mentioned that there's inscriptions and writings and hieroglyphs all over them. What if the dynastic Egyptians found these obelisks, which at some point in time were used as a power source or a way to extract the power, okay? And they just went, "Oh, that thing's really cool. I'm gonna write on it." And I know that's or I'm going to use that as a canvas for my art, right? Well, I'll
Right.
say it more eloquently. That's plausible too,
Yeah,
right?
but then it brings down to your same question: is how are they getting all the way up there and chiseling it?
I
We're
don't
not
know.
talking
That's a
about
very bizarre.
putting up like a 16-foot ladder here and climbing up. Well, I mean, these things are pretty freaking
Yeah,
big.
they are. They are. And
I'm
look,
gonna put.
right, for anybody that's listening, right, listen, we know that the dynastic Egyptians did do some
Mhm.
cool stuff, right? We're not saying that they didn't. We're not saying that they didn't have a culture where they created art and they created temples and they built stuff. Or we know that happened, right? We're just pointing to some of the more obscure, maybe obscure is not the right word, but some of the more dramatic pieces of architecture within their civilization that kind of jolts the question of, hey, man, based upon what we know about them, did they have the tech to really do this?
Right. Right. Yeah, I guess this one isn't too huge, but maybe they have done it there. But that's a
No,
lot
but
of
some of them
precision.
are gigantic. Some of them
Right.
are absolutely gigantic.
Going into iStock with that, they're going to try to charge me for that one, huh? Yeah, man, it's always been pretty fascinating to me in that regard too, just because you really don't know what you're getting into. I mean, that's pretty freaking big. That looks like it's like parked up right in the middle of a town somewhere. What is that? Yeah, it's in modern Egypt right there. Yeah, I don't know,
It's
man.
gigantic.
Yeah, it's that whole piece. it just, to me, the most plausible answer, again, I can't help but going back to it, is how is that not an ancient power plant or some sort of centralization
Yeah,
point? I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but you've never been to Egypt. Obviously, you've never been to the pyramids,
correct.
correct? Yeah. Is that some
Correct.
place you think you'd ever go?
I would love to go. I would absolutely love to go. That would be fascinating
Would you risk getting cuffed and thrown in jail by an Egyptian police
to take a
officer by
photo.
taking out your camera, taking a photo of the
No,
inside?
I'm hardcore out for that. Not doing that, dude. You
Yeah.
fucking ever watch Locked Up Abroad? No way,
No, God, no. So
bro.
that
I don't
brings
want to
me
go to
to,
jail here.
that's fair. So that kind of brings me to my next thought too, is all of the answers to the pyramids are in Egypt. They're in those pyramids. All it takes is somebody with money to walk in there, hand over, here's $100 million to the Egyptian government. Here's 44 million, $440 million to Egypt, whatever it might be. What did Elon pay for Twitter? 44 billion? Was it billion? Yeah, I
Right.
think so. Here's a whole ton of money. I don't think anybody's spend that much to go in the pyramids. Let me just have my fucking day here. Let me go into the Sphinx. Let me open that sucker up. Let me go look down below. We didn't even talk about the Sphinx. There's
I was gonna
supposedly a
say we didn't even get
cavern,
there. Yeah.
yeah, underneath that.
Yeah.
Why hasn't anyone done it? One, and why are the Egyptians so hard up on preserving it? I know that there's always the cultural aspect and the religious
I think
aspect.
that's it. I think it's
I
the
don't
cultural
think that's
aspect
it
of it.
though. I don't.
No.
I think that's bullshit. Because I think if there's a way to monetize something, or if there's a
Mm-hmm.
way to get ahead, whether it be in power, whether it be, again, monetarily, whatever it might be, I don't see a reason why a government, especially a corrupt government, wouldn't capitalize on that, leverage that to themselves. If these pyramids are ancient power plants and the Egyptians know that and they can harness that electricity and they can reproduce that in some way, why wouldn't you do that? Because then you can make your whole country all of a sudden this juggernaut with unlimited free energy. That
Yeah,
makes
but
it more
here's the thing:
attractive.
if you know the secret to an unlimited free power source, right? Then you're not making money off of that unlimited free power source anymore. Once everybody else knows about it and knows how to utilize it or construct it and then use it.
Directly, no, but nobody's going out and
Mm-hmm.
constructing those size pyramids. I think
Right.
conversely, what would end up happening is that you would become a centralized. I mean, look at Bitcoin right now, right, or any sort of cryptocurrency. What is the driver of
No, that shit
cryptocurrency?
confuses me, but yeah.
Basically, what's happening is you're getting a bunch of people that are buying graphics cards, right? Graphics cards to help processing power in their computers. And I promise there's a point to this. It comes back to ancient Egypt. Processing power require or makes your computer run hotter. So you're building in fans in there, right? Graphics cards cooking, it's running. It's like you're playing your Xbox. You play for too many hours, think it's really hot. So you get more fans that are cooking. All this is drawing electrical power. And so what happens is when you get these crypto farms, which is basically a bunch of people getting their computers built specifically for mining crypto coins. Mining just means solving math problems, more or less.
Right.
Again, oversimplifying it, it's drawing power. And you'll actually see that for a long time, there was a lot of kids that would try to do this in their own homes and they would drive up their parents' electrical bills because these computers are running at 150%. And the money that they'd be making in the mining wasn't even compensating the amount of power they were doing. However, you
Uh
look
huh.
at a country like the United States that's able to do that, and the stronger your power grid, the more productive you can be. All of a sudden, you have manufacturing goes crazy. You can mine digital coins, so on and so forth. Now, what if you had access to an unlimited power source and the energy is free? You can now bring production of anything you want and just max that power out. You can control all of the areas around you as well. Now, on the flip side of that is right. What you're saying is people can kind of replicate that. I don't think it's as easy as that. And I don't think it would happen in this lifetime or even the next. It's too massive of a project to undertake.
Yeah.
It could also just be
You
that
mean in
they
terms
like
of
the
building
fact
something of that scale?
building something of that scale, right? Why wouldn't we have already built it, right? I think that if they knew that they could do that and they did it, why wouldn't? I mean, maybe the answer is just as simple as, well, they want to keep their people oppressed so they can control them in that way, and that could be a perfectly simple answer. If it were
Could be.
me, I'd want to unlock that and make my country a superpower. Maybe the answer is, if they do that, they're worried they're going to get overtaken by another country too. I don't know. Um, yeah, it's just,
There's a
or
few rabbit holes we go down on that one.
it's a lot of rabbit holes there, right? The other option is, again, taking a very realistic perspective, is maybe it's all bullshit. Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe all these other chambers are
Could be.
empty, or they're full of bodies, and all they were doing was bringing bodies down there and killing people and murdering them. Maybe it was
Maybe it
just
was a giant
nothing.
crematorium.
Right, like that could be it. Just a giant graveyard, or that was literally, they were burning bodies, producing methane gas, and that's how they're doing it. And they don't want to admit to that in their culture. It would destroy the legacy of like the pharaohs in Egypt. I
Right.
don't
The
know.
allure, the mystery of it. Yeah. No,
Right.
that makes sense. That makes
I mean,
sense.
tourism is
Look,
huge there. It's their only industry,
I was gonna
right?
say, look, I don't know much about Egypt in terms of what their economic situation is like, but I'm sure tourism
Terrible.
is a big part,
Right.
is a
And it's
big part
wildly
of
corrupt.
their income. Yes, that I know.
Wildly
Yeah.
corrupt. Yes, I mean the police are wildly corrupt. They'll take bribes left and right. That particular story I was
Yeah.
referencing before, from, I want to say it was Jimmy Church. It could have been something else. But they basically said the guy that got arrested just threw the guy, $100, and he was off. His camera didn't come with him, but he was out of there and he wasn't going to an Egyptian jail. But I don't know. And that's always one that I've always had trouble reconciling is, if you're at the top of the government, are you concealing that information because there's nothing there and the
Hmm.
truth is not as exciting as the fiction that's been built around it? Or are you concealing it as an oppression measure? Or do you really just not know at all?
I was gonna
Um,
say, but it's also plausible that they just don't know, right? Maybe the answers aren't actually in the pyramid, right?
but
Like
that's why I
maybe
just asked, why is there not
you
somebody who
know,
has money going into there? It makes no sense. If I had that kind of money, if I had like Elon Musk money, and I'm mind boggled by some of these things, I would take that money and I would fund these expeditions, and I'd go myself. I'd say to the
I guess
government,
how many
here you
people have
go.
Elon Musk money though? I
Jeff
guess that kind of
Bezos
comes down to
does.
that too, right?
Bill
I know
Gates
you're right.
does.
You're right.
There's plenty of people that have
And
millions
based
of dollars that can
upon
sway a government.
you're
Look what
right.
we're doing in Ukraine.
And
We send them $44 million every other month, but all it took was the
yeah,
first
well, we
$4
have
million
homeless vets
dollars,
all over the
40
streets.
billion, I should say. Didn't take a whole lot to send over there, and they're swayed.
And you would think that if those answers did lie in the pyramid,
Yep.
and you could potentially create a free energy source from it, man, would it behoove those people that have that money to go and investigate and do that work? Would that be, a fantastic business venture for them?
Yeah, and that's what I bring it right back to, like the political climate of that country too, is that you make your country a superpower, immediate superpower. If you figure it out and you can just replicate it on a small scale, or you know that it exists, you know how to re-engage it, or you find the right person that's willing to fund it for you. I mean, you can make
Yeah.
all the necessary preparations you want to build up your internal military. I mean, look at what Israel has done. They built that dome right around their whole country that is impenetrable to rockets.
The
You
Iron
can
Dome, yeah.
start the Iron Dome, right? So you can start doing the same type of thing to your area, build up this military presence, because now you know that you go into debt, you do whatever you need to do, you get the funding to do it. But as soon as you turn on that power, man, you are a monster.
Your
Um,
Goldilocks, yeah.
right? So I don't know, and that kind of goes back to the whole a broader theory of why power doesn't exist on a global scale free is a control mechanism, right? Because there's a lot of money to be lost as soon as you unlock the and harness the energy that's floating around in the sky there. Sphinx. We kind of jumped over the Sphinx, which is probably one of the more iconic
Yeah,
centerpieces
we could
of
probably do an
ancient Egypt.
episode just on the Sphinx itself.
The Sphinx.
Um, what is? I know what mine is. What is for you the one fact about the Sphinx that you didn't learn in school that you find to be the most fascinating today?
I don't think I really learned anything about the Sphinx in school, and maybe because it wasn't. Maybe it's because I wasn't paying attention,
Well,
or
what I mean, what was it? Right, we know it to be a sculpture, essentially, right? They told, hey, this is. They showed you a
Right.
photo. This is the Sphinx. It's a sculpture. It's in Egypt. It's huge. It's very old. Kind of looks like a lion. Kind of looks like a man. Boom. There you
Right.
go. Right. I mean, that pretty much sums up what you learned about the Sphinx.
So I think the piece that came after that was learning about that there were hidden chambers underneath the Sphinx.
Hmm.
And I don't know much beyond that. I'm not studied. I'm not an Egyptologist that much. So I'm not really studying that, but I know that. And I think I actually might have heard, and I could be completely off on this, that the head is actually not the original head either.
Yes.
Is that where you were getting at?
So, well, I'll answer my own question, right? Well, actually, let's talk about the head first. So, yes, so if you look at the whole Sphinx itself, and maybe it'd be helpful to pull up a photo,
Yeah.
the
Are you doing that? Or you
body
want me to
of
do
the
it?
Sphinx, you could do that. You're much better than I am at that stuff. The body of the Sphinx is much larger than the head. I mean, it doesn't, it looks silly, right? It almost looks like if you were to ask, like a 4-year-old to draw you a picture of a lion man,
Yep.
right? And they, right, how a 4-year-old wouldn't draw things to scale. And so we're talking about people that can so precisely build these other sculptures, okay, and the pyramids that are wonders of the world and align them to the stars. Yet it's going to be the scale of it is going to be that off. You have this tremendous body and this tiny little head. It doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
So we know that it's not the original head. All right, that's number one. And number two, I think the fact. Well, I'll answer my own question now. What I learned about the Sphinx that I find to be absolutely fascinating is that if you look at the erosion on the Sphinx, it's conducive with rainfall that occurs over thousands and thousands of years. And so, what
Okay.
does that mean? That means that the Sphinx is much older than what mainstream archaeology tells you that it is. Why is that? Because there hasn't been a significant amount of rainfall in that part of the world for over
Right.
12,000 years.
Right.
There wasn't significant rainfall in that part of the world
Interesting.
3,000 4,000 years ago. So where did that water erosion come from? It had to have come from rainfall, and it had to have come from it had to have occurred over a significant period of time. We're not talking about hundreds of years. We're talking about thousands, and not just one, two, or
Right.
three. We're talking about 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14, 20,000 years of rainfall that fell on this thing that had to have happened when when the climate was different, when there was more rainfall in this part of the world. So to me, I think that's the most fascinating, and that's the most telltale sign that this is a lot older than what they'd have you believe it to be.
Right. I mean, even like looking at the picture here, just the body doesn't really look like much of anything, and I don't know if that's a product of excavation or
Hmm.
erosion. And the head obviously looks like it's well refined there, so I don't really
But it
know.
looks much more well preserved, right? Which would lend to the idea that the head is much newer than the body is.
Right. Well, I mean, like, if you look at the head, though, look at the. I guess these would be the feet or the arms.
Right.
I mean, they look very similar to the head, don't they?
Yeah, I would say that the feet, the paws, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
look more similar in terms of preservation
Mm.
than the body of it. I would agree.
Now, do you think that
Again, we're
this
not experts,
body
but
is just buried, and this is maybe a person standing up, and this excavation was just done maybe haphazardly?
I guess one could potentially say that. I think that could be plausible. I think that the alignment of the legs and the paws would
Well,
be odd.
that's harder for me to discuss there, but it could be somebody
Yeah,
reaching their arms out though too.
I suppose it could be.
Like
I
if you
suppose it
look
could
back
be.
at the what was that other one you were talking about before? The not the Mormon, um, the
The
Colossus
Colossi
of
of Memnon.
Amnon. Yeah, yeah, there we go. All right, so let me pull this guy up. The Memnon. Memnon. Okay,
Hmm.
so in all of these others, see how they have their arms sitting like this?
Yeah.
Ah, I hate that this doesn't just open the picture up for me. Let me just dump the image address in there. All right, so we've got the Colossus of Memnon, and I apologize to people that are just
Yep.
listening to this, but look at the way this is set up. Okay, you've got the head, you've got the arm, and then the arm is kind of jutting out on his lap.
Hmm.
What's to say that this wasn't designed the same way? It's got like
No, it's
the
similar.
flaps
It's
behind
similar.
the
I'll
head
say that.
there. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Now I
Which
see
would
where
be,
the
I guess, some
paws
kind of a
are.
headdress.
Right. Yeah, the
Right.
headdress. So he's got the headdress, he's got his neck, and it could just be that he's sitting upright, just like this guy was,
What if
and
he
his
was sitting
arm goes
upright? What if
down,
it's
his
much
arm goes
larger?
up. What's that?
So what if it's actually much larger and there's much more structure underneath that we
Well,
count
that's what
on?
I'm suggesting is like, do you think that this right here, this erosion, and I'm not dismissing the
Hmm.
idea that it could be much older than it is. I think for me, I think that's a given at this stage. But what I am suggesting is that I often don't understand, and this is probably because I just don't understand archaeology that well. I don't understand how when you excavate something, you know when to stop, right?
Yes, I've always
Maybe
found that.
it's
Like, where do you begin and where do you stop?
well, I definitely don't know where you begin. That just absolutely
Right.
floors me. But where you
Yes.
stop is like, all right, well, maybe this is just
Yeah.
because this is the same kind of stone that's used in the head, so you're stopping there. Sure, fine. But what if you were, what if this was eroded? What if this was just, I don't know, what if this is built up over time? What if this was intentionally put there to mask it? To me, this looks very similar to this. Obviously, the face is
You're right.
eroded here, but the headdress is perfect. And then if you follow down where the arms would be here, I mean that their arms are seated outwards. Now, again, this is the perspective of that is very much off. It's very further out.
I was gonna say the perspective is very off when you look at
Right.
that. Because the
But like
arms, we're talking about the arms that would be 20 times longer than a normal person's arms. That would be
right,
seated very
right.
far in front of them.
But we might not be getting the full picture of this one, what this actually is either, right? Or this could be
Right.
something different. Maybe this was something else that wasn't involved. That plus the body. I mean, I guess okay. I never really noticed this back here. You do see the foot back here of the Sphinx. That's something I didn't realize before. Okay, so that does change my perspective a little bit. But the body
Hmm.
to me has always just looked like crap. Like it just looks like this is an
Yeah.
unfinished project. And like you can see kind of these other broken stone in there. Is that an erosion, a product of erosion where this was more rounded and well crafted? Or is that just a shitty excavation job? I don't know the answer to that. That's an
Yeah.
Egyptologist
It is
would be able to
odd
tell
when
us
you
that.
look at it. Could you zoom in again real quick?
Yeah, of course.
It's weird how you have rounded features of the
Right. Look at this.
rounded features, yet on the side they're very straight.
It's just yeah, it's crap.
It's like somebody
Even the
built like a
foot.
literal wall.
Right, right. Well, okay, that's interesting then. Is like, did they build around this, and was there something
Right,
on
like
the
that looks like a
inside?
wall.
Right.
Very well could
Now,
be.
if you look at all the other structure around here, again, I don't know how much of this was actually Egypt building it afterwards or whatnot, but you can see they dug that out there. But that kind of harpens back to our discussion before. Are they hiding something? And so if you look at that, and we now know that there's a chamber underneath, is there a reason that if that was poorly excavated, again, not talking as an archaeologist, I don't know, but if that was poorly excavated, was that done intentionally to hide that there is a chamber underneath? Question
If
one.
so,
Rhetorical.
why?
That's question number two. Why? That's yeah,
Right.
yeah. That's exactly it, and
What's
that's
there?
where my
What's
mind
in the
sits.
chamber
Where does it
that,
go?
yeah, where does it go? Is it connected to
Does it go to the
something? What
pyramid?
do they find inside that chamber? Like
Hmm.
what's so
Right,
secretive that
right.
we can't know about it?
And that's where I have a really hard time believing that there's not somebody in Egypt. The hell with religions. I don't buy that for a second. That you think this is a spiritual site, a ritual site, a religious site, a holy site, and nobody is going to go in there and find out what's in there. Get out of here. I don't think that. I don't think that in the Catholic Church. I don't think that in the Jewish church or synagogue. I don't think that in any other religion on the face of the planet. I think that if somebody is curious enough and they're close to the source, and I'm not even saying they got to be at the top. You got security guards living in Egypt. You got plenty of people scrounging around there. Again, it's a very corrupt country. They don't give a shit. I think there's something that's got like somebody's got to have checked that out. Somebody has got to know what's going on there, and that's my
Oh,
question: is
100%. I
what's
agree.
being hidden? And you cannot tell me for one single solitary second, even the most diehard religious country on the planet will have no problem going down there and checking it out. They know they've been there. There's no way they haven't been there, or there's no way they haven't gotten somebody to go down there for them and fund it or something like that. And that's what I want to know. And that's why I've always come back to the idea of like find these millionaires. I don't think it would cost a lot of money. And by that I mean more money than we have, but not like
Right.
billions to
Comparatively.
say, here's $100 million. I'm going in. Because that
Yeah.
$100 million ain't going to go to the country of Egypt to help the people. It's going into a politician's pocket and maybe like a handful of security
Correct.
guards to get that guy down there. It's all under the table shit. Now, maybe that has happened and maybe that's kept quiet. But again, what's the reason? Why would that be the case? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't. I'm not as well. Look, I mean, I'm not very well versed on a lot of this stuff. I think that, having said that, the Sphinx itself is one that I've probably looked into the least of all of them. So I don't know about any specific theories about what could or could not, be inside that chamber or why it was built and things of that nature. But we know that there is something there. What is it, dude? What the fuck
Well, the
is it?
Sphinx too, I feel like that's more modern in terms of the conspiracy
Well,
around it. Like we just found
correct.
out
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
there's these
Right.
tunnels or whatnot. There's
There's
these chambers
chambers and
underneath.
tunnels and whatnot
Couldn't think of the
underneath.
word
Yeah.
there. So that's probably and that's why I've really never paid much mind to it. I just thought it was another statue that they threw up in Egypt, like every other one that they have, floating around. Am I curious about where it came from? Of course. Do I believe that it was moved around? Probably not.
Maybe.
Maybe it's plausible, and that's always been the problem with ancient Egypt is that everything you say is plausible. Could they have put these stones on giant wooden logs and rolled it? Absolutely. Would it have been easy?
They could put the
Absolutely not.
smaller ones on, correct. They
Even
could put
maybe the
smaller
bigger ones.
stones. Yeah.
We could also just be dismissing the fact that sometimes maybe these things look like they're carved out of a single piece of stone because maybe they eroded that way. That's certainly plausible too. What do we know about erosion? Of course, like we've studied it to a degree, but we're talking about erosion over our lifetimes. We're not talking erosion over hundreds of thousands, I guess for the 100,000 years or this qualifies here, but 3,000 years or 100,000 years. We don't know. We really don't know. We just
Sure.
assume that we know.
Right.
What do you
We're
think
taking
about the
educated
theory?
guesses.
Taking educated guesses. Yeah, that's all science is a series of educated guesses
Sure.
based on extrapolating small experiments. Most times they're right, plenty of times they're wrong. What do you think about the thought that the coarseness or the hardiness of rocks has changed over the period of time? You think that's possible?
So we're stating that they could have been more coarse and more hardy years ago than they are today. Is that what you're
I
saying?
think less. I think, what do you think about the
So you,
possibility that maybe limestone just wasn't as dense 3,000 years
I don't
ago?
know.
Do you think that's
I've
possible?
never really thought about it. What is there anything in geology that suggests that could be the case?
I have absolutely no idea. I'm going to pose that question to anybody out there. If you're a geologist, is it possible
So
that
I guess what
the,
would be
the
the
density?
benefits of that, right? So it would be lighter, and more malleable, I suppose.
Well, that's it. Right. If it's lighter, they can move it. If it's more malleable, it completely explains how they're able to chisel away. If there's some sort of a basic chemical reaction that they could have induced to harden this limestone up at that particular time, so that way it stayed
Yeah.
put for all these years, or inverse to soften it up to move it around. Is that possible too?
There are theories. There are theories that suggest that they actually, in a very rudimentary way to explain it, kind of melted these stones, and then
Hmm.
kind of cast them at a later and different point in time, different place, I should
Right.
say.
Right. Well, that would go
Which,
back to,
and
to
I,
new technologies that they didn't
yeah,
have.
right, exactly. Um, it's funny. I was actually just listening. This does us no use to really talk about, or nobody's going to find anything else about what I'm about to say. But I was listening to something the other day, and apparently there were plants, that could actually soften stone. Couldn't tell you where they were found. Couldn't even tell you what the hell. I listened to so much. Couldn't even tell you who the hell I was listening to or what it was about. But I have heard theories about that, which is intriguing to say the least.
All right. I'm going to give you something that I just found. And this is what I want you to think on. And I'm actually going to move this out of the way because I want to see your face and your reaction when I read this. Okay. So I just typed into our friends at OpenAI Chat GPT. Is there anything in geology, or is there any evidence in geology that rocks can change density over centuries? The answer, succinctly, is yes. There is evidence that in geology that rocks can change density over centuries to various processes. I'm going to give you an example first, but then I'm going to go back to what the actual definition is. But limestone was the example they gave. It's a sedimentary rock can transform into marble, a metamorphic rock under high pressure and temperature. Totally makes sense. We have it now. Metamorphism, it's the process, involves the alteration of the mineral composition and structure of rocks due to the changes in temperature, pressure, and chemically active fluids. This can lead to an increase or decrease in the density of the rock. So I'll pose that question again. Now, talking about the Younger Dryas, is it possible, is it conceivable that limestone, what is there now, wasn't limestone centuries ago, thousands of years ago? And
What if it was like gypsum? If it was so light and
I don't know
so easy to
gypsum,
carve?
is gypsum a real thing?
Yeah, it's like
I'm not a
look up
geologist. I
gypsum.
don't know
It's
these things.
think about like drywall.
Okay,
It's
perfect.
comparable to
There we
like
go.
drywall.
Right, right.
Yeah,
So what if it's like that? And well, actually, drywall's a perfect example, right? Because
yeah.
drywall by itself, you can put your hand through. It's nothing. It's like paper. Drywall, when
Mm-hmm.
you put it against a couple studs, you can still put your hand through it if you're the right spot, but all of a sudden it's reinforced, right?
Right.
What if limestone was gypsum? What if limestone was something else? And the Younger Dryas, which buried a lot of this stuff, but whatever had happened that according to science, this is mainstream science now, there's major climate cataclysmic events, which
Yeah.
involved temperature shifts, dramatic temperature shifts, which, based on this definition of metamorphism, could create some sort of chemical reaction, and it hardened the limestone in place.
Very well could
Something to
be.
think about. Now
What
that
I
that
will
lends
tell
itself
you is
more to the
that
fact that it was the Egyptians that did it, but nevertheless,
right.
it could explain from a. I mean, we are
Regardless,
the
like,
conspiracy realists, so
but here's the thing, right? I think what most people want, right? Like, and I talked about earlier, right? Like, what I think my favorite theory is and why that it's an older civilization because it's more fun, it's sexier, it's oh my god,
mhm.
it's a mystery, it's somebody that's lost, right?
Yep.
I think people just want answers regardless of what the answers are, right? Like, if you could find out tomorrow the answer to all the questions that we posed and they didn't match your ideas or your theories of what they could be, wouldn't you still want to know? Of course you would, right? I just want to know. I
I mean, I
just
would.
want to know.
I think we've seen through recent times that sometimes people don't like the answers that they're given, and they
Yeah.
latch on to whatever they want. They double down because that's what they taught, or that's what
Well,
they were
we
taught,
know that
and they
that's
don't want to
happened
feel like
many
they were
times
manipulated.
throughout history. It's
I mean,
happened
it's
many
happened over
times
the
throughout
last couple of
history,
years.
especially in science. Yeah, well, like, absolutely,
Um,
you're right. Look at there's some governors around the U.S. that can attest to that.
yep,
Um,
yep, yeah,
no, one
man.
hundred
It's
percent.
It's fascinating to me. That's an interesting one though, because I think that, I mean, obviously there's some other pieces that attribute to that. And they say alteration and mineral replacement, tectonic processes, erosion, natural weather, chemical weathering, so on and so forth. Granite, when subjected to chemical weathering, can alter form to clay minerals, which are less dense. So, granite can basically turn into clay. Same basic concept, obviously, in reverse. So,
Right.
what's to say that these things don't all, I mean, they all exist in our society today. And I understand that in science, we can create chemicals and they're manufactured, but what are those chemicals actually made of, right? They're made out of naturally occurring elements. We're not ever creating something out of the clear blue. Nothing that
Right.
we've ever created, and that includes plastic. Plastic is not,
Comes from
it's
oil.
not like it's not fake. It's not like we've produced this new at its cellular level, this new thing. It's
Right.
something that we've taken and manipulated in some way, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we've done that in the past and we just don't know about. We don't know anything about these cultures. We barely know who built these freaking things. So how do we know what they were doing? How do we know the tooling? Yeah, we found some bullshit tools laying around, but that goes back to like our plastic drills, which are great. But you find the little piece of metal, you know that somebody's not. They didn't sit there with the tip of the drill tip and twist that with their fingers. Of course not. But the
Right.
body of that drill just deteriorated because it's a piece of plastic. It deteriorated over thousands of years. Yeah, it's fascinating. But that kind of brings me full circle to the fact that I really don't know about ancient Egypt. I don't know who did it. I don't know. I every time I think I've like walked away from it, and this is what's the most fascinating part about really all ancient architecture. But every time I think I've settled on the idea that all right, I'm done with it. This is my opinion. The Egyptian built it. Done. I come back. Nope, nope. I think it was the aliens. Nope, I'm coming back. I think it's an ancient
Dude,
civilization. Nope, it could be the
you and
Egyptians.
I You and I debated, and it's funny. I can tell by your smile, you probably know what I'm talking about right now. But when we first started talking, and you had mentioned, hey, we're talking about, very old civilizations. What else do they have to do, right?
Yep.
There was plenty of manpower. You and I debated this in one of our group chats with some other people in it, I don't know, probably 4, 5, 6, 7 months ago. And here we are again talking about the possibility of it being something else. Yeah, no, it's funny. I'll tell you one
You're
thing I
running.
do know. There's gonna be people that are a lot smarter than us that are gonna watch this and go, "These guys are fucking idiots," and that's okay
That's
because this
fine.
is fun. Because it's fun to talk about.
You know what though too is I mean I would love to if you're watching this out there. I invite you guys to join us. We're always looking for people that are smarter than us to kind of give us a little bit of schooling in either direction, as long as you're respectful. But you mentioned Graham Hancock earlier. We always talk about Joe Rogan, and Rogan did that exact type of thing. He had a little bit of a debate, and I think as if you want to present ideas, factuals or counterfactuals, fine by me, fine by Tim. We're just asking you try to do that a little with a little bit of respect and decency. We're trying to appeal to regular people, and we're trying to be open minded about this stuff too. To Tim's point, I don't think that we're looking to prove that our theory is right. We're the type of people that
No,
just
not
want
at
to know
all.
because we think it's kind of cool.
And not even that, dude. We're talking about multiple theories, right? Like I will not die on any hill about anything that we spoke about tonight, right? And I
Yeah.
don't think that you would either. In fact, I know
No, I've
you
changed
wouldn't.
your
It's
minds 100
just
times. In this call, I changed my mind 3 times.
yeah,
So
dude.
who
They're
knows?
just fun, interesting theories that are out there, and we find them interesting. So
Yeah.
it is what it is.
All right, we're going to leave you guys with that. This has been, it was supposed to be ancient architecture. It looks like we're doing another podcast on ancient architecture, and this
Guess
is just
so.
going to be on ancient Egypt. If you are watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. Both of those things are really important. Take 2 seconds out of your life to do. It helps us a great deal. If you're on Spotify, please make sure you're following us. If you're on Twitter or X, again, follow, share, just engage with us on any platform you're on. It goes a long way. And that'll be it for us today. See you again next time.